Joining us today on MSUEagles.com, the longtime radio voice of the Morehead State Eagles, Chuck Mraz. And Chuck has been calling Morehead State men's basketball games for 25 years and Morehead State football for 24 seasons. And Chuck, we appreciate your time. Let's first stroll down memory lane a little bit and let the viewers out there know where you grew up and talk about your childhood a little bit up through the high school years.
Well, I grew up generally in the Chicago area. I was born in Evanston, Illinois, about 2 blocks away from Ryan Field, where Northwestern University plays football. Actually, my parents are both Northwestern graduates, and they got married after their senior year in college. And I was born there, and we lived there for about a year or so, then moved down to Dallas. My dad got transferred by U.S. Gypsum. Lived down in the Dallas area for about 5 years, then moved back up to the northern Chicago suburbs, grew up there, and played a lot of baseball and football, then went on to what I believe was at least a semi-successful academic career at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale.
Talk about the influence of sports on your life early on, and then as you got into your college years at SIU Carbondale, the influence of broadcasting and the profession that you now work in.
Well, sports has always been a part of my life ever since I realized that, I could pick up a bat and hit a ball and run to a base, for instance, when I was 5 years old. I remember that my grandparents out in their yard, they hung a wiffle ball off of a tree and let me beat on that thing with a wiffle ball bat literally for hours. And so I was hooked on baseball and found out about other sports. And I mean, it seemed like I was always playing a sport. Even when I was in, say, varsity athletics in high school, in my free time, I was looking for a ball game of some time, someplace else. Went on to college, I loved sports, always following sports, played intramurals and things like that. I mean, sports has always been a really important part of my life. And broadcasting just seemed to be a natural fit. When I was in high school, I thought, what would I want to do with my career? And initially, I wanted to become a print journalist and become a sports writer, and then as I got into college, I found out that a lot of my friends were going into broadcasting. I always thought that was pretty cool. I realized, hey, maybe I'd have a chance to be a sports broadcaster, and I felt like I talked better than I wrote. So I thought that perhaps it might be a better fit for me to go into this.
Tell us about high school years, college years, early professional years, kind of your mentors, people you've looked up to, and people who have been helpful to you in getting to this point in your career.
Well, the instructors I had, for instance, in college were really good. I have to admit that they made me a lot better than what I would have made myself without their assistance. They taught me really how to write and how to be disciplined with my writing. They taught me how to ad-lib on the air. They taught me how to speak properly. I think that they worked a lot with my voice and articulation. I had kind of that flat Chicago A in my speech, and they helped me get rid of that. But before that, in high school, I mean, when I look at my personal mentors, I believe that people like my grandfathers, who are hard workers, they instilled that work ethic in me. And my mom and dad were both hard workers too. And the thing about it is I've always believed that hard work can overcome maybe a lack of ability in some areas. So if I'm struggling with something, what I try to do is I just work harder. I put more of myself into it. And I appreciate what my mom and dad taught me, and I appreciate what my grandfathers taught me about how to be a man, how to be trustworthy, how to shake hands and mean it. And when you say something, you do what you mean and you say what you mean. And when you make an agreement with someone, your word is your bond. And you go out there and you give everything that you've got to anything that you're doing.
I guess you're approaching 30 years overall in affiliation or in association with Morehead State University. You've got a full-time job on campus at Morehead State Public Radio and do the football and men's basketball games on the side. But let us in on that initial story on how you got here and kind of the thought process and maybe where else you had applied and why you ultimately chose to come to Morehead State in the first place.
Well, I was working at a small station in Southern Illinois before we came here, very close to my wife's hometown. Actually, we lived in her hometown, and I was commuting about 30 miles to work, and we were doing a lot of high school ball games, and I always wanted to get into college broadcasting. And in 1984, I remember the job at WMKY, Morehead State Public Radio, for those who know it by a different name, was looking for a sports director, someone who could do MSU football, basketball, and baseball. And I wound up sending in a tape. The one thing I didn't have on there was that at that time they did baseball. And what's really funny, because that's the sport that I played the most as a kid growing up. I actually coached high school baseball before I came here, and that's the sport I knew the most about. But I didn't have anything on my resume tape, so I was eliminated from consideration. They liked my other stuff, but said we didn't have any baseball on there. So we're not going to hire you. Well, the job opened up 2 years later. The guy who had it left and went someplace else. Well, I didn't make that mistake again. I'd actually done kind of a demo tape at Wrigley Field. I'd been covering games up in Chicago at one point in my career, and a friend and I were able to get into an empty box, a press box area where we were able to record with some professional equipment, some play-by-play of baseball. And I said, well, if I'm not going to get the job this time, at least I'm not going to be eliminated because there's no baseball on my resume tape. So I actually wound up putting about a couple of innings of me doing a game at Wrigley Field between the Cubs and the Pirates.
This is part one of the two-part Chuck Mraz conversation. Chuck, thanks for your time today, and we'll be posting part two later on this week.
Okay.